Welcome to This Story Needs to Be Heard with Lance Gunkel and Adam Steen. This Story Needs to Be Heard is a collection of stories from unsung heroes who are living a life of impact in Iowa and across the nation. This series is brought to you by Syverson Strege, a financial planning firm that exists to help enrich and empower your life and the community. Syverson Strege's focus is to assist clients to be good stewards of their resources to pursue their passions. Join us as we capture stories that need to be heard.
Hello, thank you for joining us today for the This Story Needs to Be Heard interview series. My name is Lance Gunkel. I'm the Managing Director at Syverson Strege. Joining me is my colleague Adam Steen, the Director of Business Development. And today we are very thankful to have with us Teree Caldwell-Johnson. Teree, thank you for spending time with us this morning. I know we are very excited to speak with you today, to hear your messages and learn about what you find important and what you think we need to take with us to consider. Teree is very active in the Des Moines community. Her CV is lengthy, and it is not filled with fluff. She has made a lasting impact on our community and for a variety of companies and nonprofit organizations. She is the CEO of the Oakridge Neighborhood, and she's a board member for numerous organizations, including the Des Moines Public Schools, the Greater Des Moines Community Foundation, and the Mid-Iowa Health Foundation. So Teree, maybe let's begin with your seat on the Des Moines Public Schools Board. And can you share with us what motivated you to serve in that position?
Well, first of all, Lance and Adam, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to participate in your series, and I'm flattered that you would invite me. My journey to the Des Moines Public School Board probably started when I was a child, because I'm the child of educators. My father was the first not the first African-American, but he came to my hometown of Salina, Kansas, to be the principal at the segregated school that was in my hometown at the time. And my brother and sister both attended that school, but I was born in 1956, and very soon thereafter, we moved to integrating our schools, and that school was closed, and my father was fortunate enough to get a position with the Salina Public Schools. And so he served in that role for many, many years and moved into other principalships and administrative jobs. And my mother is a college professor, so I think I come by my interest in education just from an early age. But I don't know that I ever really saw myself as serving as an elected member of a school board. But when I came to the Oakridge organization back in 2004, the elementary school immediately across the street from the Oakridge neighborhood was set to close. And that school served, of course, our neighborhood and surrounding neighborhoods, including Drake and Sherman Hill. But the other thing that I found very interesting at the time when I started to sort of peel back the layer of the onion was that, unlike any other neighborhood in Des Moines, the children in the Oakridge neighborhood were attending 17 different elementary schools. And the elementary school across the street was scheduled to close, and I couldn't quite make those 2 points meet at any place. And so I did a little more investigation, and after understanding sort of the nature of the fact that they were closing the school because of low school enrollment, I said, well, if you didn't bus our kids to 17 different elementary schools, it would be a completely different picture. So about that time, I heard that a KO was not going to be running for his seat on the school board, and there likely was going to be an at-large seat open. And so I talked to my husband, and we agreed that that was something that I should do. So I'm not suggesting that I ran solely on the platform of the closing of Edmonds, but that was certainly a big factor in my decision. But I also felt like I could bring a lot to that board. and recognizing that the sole African American serving on the board was going to be transitioning, I felt that we needed to have representation. And so I ran. There were 3 people who also ran for 2 seats, and I was successful. And 15 years later, I'm still on the Des Moines School Board. This is my 4th and final term. But I will tell you that the outcome of the Edmonds story is something that I'm very proud of. And I'm not going to take credit for it because there were lots of people that had a lot to do with this decision. But the superintendent that had recently come into the district after that original announcement had been made decided to reverse the decision and not close Edmonds. So I'll take a small piece of the credit for that. What I'll take a big piece of the credit for is that literally across the street from the Oakridge Neighborhood, we have a fabulous building, the Edmonds Elementary School, the first new build in the district since the passage of the local option sales tax. So very proud of not only my service on the school board, but my ability in some way, shape, or form to influence policy, influence decisions, and influence actions that I think ultimately are in the best interest of all of our students, especially our students of color.
That's awesome. Teree, that's a fascinating story, and I appreciate you mentioning that. One thing we do at Syverson Strege is we sort of challenge employees, regardless of their level of leadership, to get involved in the community, either just from a volunteer perspective or specifically to serving on boards of communities and organizations across Des Moines. And we do that because we feel that when you get involved in a board and you're on levels of leadership like that, that you learn things that you probably wouldn't learn in your day-to-day life, day-to-day work routine. In context of learning from your role on the school board, what are a few things that you could share with others about what you learned and are learning from that position on the school board that somebody may take and say, okay, that's something you can actually learn, and I want to learn that too. What are some things that you learned with your time on the school board?
Well, I think there are several things that I've learned. I learned to know that I don't always know everything, and there are so many varying factors that influence and impact the decisions that you are required to make. So being willing to invest the time and really being willing to do a deep dive into the data and the information to inform your decision making is critical. I don't know that that's not any different than what we would do in our everyday jobs, but when you're asked to do it in a volunteer capacity, it takes time. And you have to be willing to invest that time. You have to be willing to do the work in order for you to be the best you can be in the position that you hold. And I take that very seriously. I typically am on the weekend before school board meetings doing my deep dive into the school board agenda, the data, the information that I'm going to be asked to weigh in on. So being willing to invest the time is really important. Another thing that I take away is sometimes you got to know when to hold and know when to fold. And I say that because, you can't fight every battle. You got to pick your battles, and you also have to know when you've pushed the envelope far enough and you need to step back and just let things play out. That's a hard lesson to learn because I think sometimes we're so interested in doing that we sometimes don't step back and really allow our listening ears to really step in and allow us to hear varying perspectives so that we can make, again, the best decision that we can make. I think the final thing that I would say is in roles like this, there are times to lead and there are times to lead by following. And I think that when there is an issue that you are passionate about, then you definitely need to take the leadership on that. But I think there are also times when there are people at the table that have equally important issues that may not be your issue, but you can certainly follow someone else's lead as they begin to step out and really begin to bring perspective and life to whatever their issue is. So, being willing to lead, but also being willing to follow, I think, is a really important lesson that you have to learn. In our board, there are 7 members, 7 strong members with very diverse backgrounds, diverse interests, diverse perspectives. And I think that's the beauty of the Des Moines School Board. We're probably the most diverse board, not only in Des Moines, but in the state of Iowa. We have individuals of African descent, we have Latinos, we have young people, we have middle-aged, we have older individuals. I'll take the cake for being the oldest member on the board. But all of those varying perspectives, I think, are so important to our ability to really represent the broad interests of our district. I don't know if people realize this, but Des Moines Public Schools is a majority minority district. We have a larger number of minorities in our district than we do individuals of white individuals in our community. And so the thing that I think is so important is that representation does matter. And we are able to bring our perspectives to the table to really help make the decisions that are important for all of our students.
Yeah, that's very sage advice. I appreciate that. We have a 5-year-old, well, soon to be 5. He turns 5 on the 4th of July, little boy, and we also have a soon to be 3-year-old, and we're in the Clay Elementary School, Southeast Polk, and our 5-year-old has an IEP, and we deal with a lot of sort of, to us, unique challenges, and especially with, and I hate even calling out the name COVID, but with going on, it's created a whole new level of challenges. And I just got one final question in regards to the schools. What would you say is the biggest challenge that the school system faces today, where we stand at this moment in time, sort of in the midst of the COVID crisis?
Yeah. Well, COVID has turned literally every institution on its head and required people to move into realms of service delivery that I don't think anyone would have ever imagined or expected. Working remotely, serving remotely, supporting remotely, doing literally everything remotely, but at a time when we still have a digital divide in our community. So I would say that really when I sort of begin to peel back the layer of the onion on COVID, especially as it relates to public education, I think the key term that I want to lift up here is equity. Equity of access, equity of support, equity of education, and equity of assistance. And we have not hit that at all. Across our school districts, and we have a number here in the metro area that are all very diverse in their own ways, larger and larger numbers of free and reduced lunch and or minority students in literally every district in the metro area. But, one of the biggest issues and one of the biggest challenges is when you move to a distance learning environment, people have to have access to technology. So you can go to a one-to-one environment. You can give every kid a tablet, every kid a computer, but if they don't have access to the internet in their home, their ability to meet the mark and to do the work is limited. Yeah. And I think that's where we are, quite frankly, the most challenged across our communities. Return to learn is going to look different in every single school district in the metro area. How we begin to prepare for and mitigate round 2, which we know is going to come at some point, is going to hit us hard. And what I always ask for is that people have patience, because we're dealing with new territory. This is virgin territory that no one has ever had to deal with. And we're doing the best we can with the resources we have and with the people who are in a position to make decisions, but it's hard. And even for your son, Adam, with his IEP, and that's an individualized education program for people that don't know, and that's often for kids that have behavior challenges, other developmental challenges, or other things that require a different level of effort that brings in not only teachers, but social workers, counselors, and other supports. For kids that have IEPs, kids that are in special ed, and other kids in the district, it's a double whammy, because our ability to support and serve them remotely is even more challenging because of the challenges that they bring to the table. And so, this is a situation where I say we need all hands on deck. all good minds helping us think through what the best options and best opportunities are. But please just have a little grace, give us some patience, because this is tough stuff. And I don't think that there is a roadmap, there are no guideposts, and there are certainly no lessons that others have learned that can be applied here. We are learning as we go.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Yeah, I know, just applying the same decision making to our office. So we're a staff of 20, and I sweat those decisions on a daily basis. So I can only imagine doing that for an entire school system. And it's really easy to take for granted access to, work from home or study from home situations. But that's difficult for many people. And I think it's easy to forget that everyone's home situation is very unique.
Mm-hmm.
And learning at home can be a challenge.
Yeah. Well, I think it's further compounded as well, especially for women and minorities who oftentimes are the breadwinners in the family who have to go to work every day. They are the essential workers who are on the front lines, making sure that we can all function the way we need to. And when they're away from the home, you wonder what's going on with their children, because they don't necessarily have those supports. They're not able to work remotely. So there are so many layers to COVID and its impact. But I do believe that once we get on the other side of this, and I'm hoping that will be sooner versus later, but I'm not overly optimistic about that. But I do think that we really do have to have some key takeaways from COVID once we get to that recovery mode. I feel like we're still in relief and response. We're not to recovery yet. But once we get to recovery, I definitely think we need to step back and say, what did we learn from this? Because, I believe that there will be another at some point. And so we really do have to think about what we've learned and how we carry those lessons forward.
Yeah, agreed. Well, it's fascinating to hear that your 4 terms on the school board was all initiated by seeing the school that is used by the Oakridge community, be closed, and it's led to all these years of service. So let's transition to the Oakridge community and talk about, maybe if you can share the founding story of the Oakridge neighborhood and the work that you're doing there today.
I'd be happy to. So I'm so proud because we are actually in the tail end of our 50th anniversary celebration. So Oakridge is a survivor. We've been around for 50 years, and the story of Oakridge is really quite interesting. Back in the 60s, there were 2 failed referenda for public housing in Des Moines. For whatever reason, the citizens of our community decided that they did not want public housing. So it was the faith community that came together through the Des Moines Area Religious Council. It was then the Des Moines Area Council of Churches to actually initiate the application to the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development that actually established the Oakridge neighborhood. So I consider us one of the biggest and best early faith-based initiatives in the Des Moines community. And 50 years later, we're still standing, and we are strong. We are a survivor. And the one thing that people often wonder about Oakridge is why we have survived. We are a project-based Section 8. So when you make application to Oakridge, we are the only place that your Section 8 would apply, which is very different than the Des Moines Public Housing Authority, which is a voucher-based program. So when you get a voucher from the city of Des Moines, that voucher makes you eligible for Section 8 housing literally everywhere in the country. By contrast, when you make application to Oakridge, your application only applies here and it is not transferable. But the thing that I find most interesting about our project-based, and you think about the Cabrini Greens and the Robert Taylor Homes and other places around the country that no longer exist, the reason why I think Oakridge has survived is that we didn't build up like in a tenement structure, we built out like you're a regular neighborhood. We have 35 buildings on our campus, 300 units, great sight lines and ways that we can literally see everything that's happening in our neighborhood. So 50 years later, we're still standing strong. And I always tell people, when you really think about the big issues that we're talking about in our community these days, housing is one of those. And 50 years later, your largest project-based Section 8 housing entity is still standing, still surviving, and still serving. We have over 1,200 individuals that live on our campus, and we provide not only housing, but supportive services that really put them on the path to sustain self-sufficiency. So proud of our 50-year history and proud to lead an organization that has such a rich legacy of service, but more importantly, a rich legacy of making a difference. And can't believe I've been here for, 15 years, but I have, and I love it. And I can't imagine myself anywhere else.
That's awesome. Teree, that's fascinating to me. I'm a student of business, and more importantly, when I look at business and organizations, their ability to change and adapt over time and add value over time is one thing that helps sustain for a period of time, like 50 years. And it's interesting, you mentioned DMARC. As a firm at Syverson Strege, we've done a lot to try to help DMARC. And knowing a little bit about DMARC, their organization has changed over time based on needs that they've seen in the community. So in your 15 years with Oakridge, what are some of the needs in that community that you've seen change over time, and where do you see those changes occurring in the future?
That's a great question, Adam. And as with any nonprofit, our need to remain and provide services is challenged each and every day. The demand for our services is higher than it's ever been. And I don't know that people really know this, but in addition to the 300 units of Section 8 low-income housing, we actually in 2013 brought on our own senior housing project, Silver Oaks. So that is a market rate project, but it's meant to provide supportive services and housing to a senior population, many of whom left our main campus to move into that senior housing, and then others from the larger community that have come in and occupied those units, and they're 1 and 2 bedroom units. The other thing that people oftentimes do not realize about our organization is we're not just housing. We provide a range of supportive services that meet the needs of not only the residents that live on our campus, but are also available to individuals that live in the larger community that would like to access our services. So in addition to our housing platform, we have a nationally accredited, state licensed early childhood center that serves children ages 6 weeks through pre-K. We have an educationally based 21st century after school, out of school program that serve the needs of youth grades K through 8 with a focus on reading, math, science, and technology. We have an adult and family program that is a case managed workforce program where we're providing support for individuals who are underemployed, unemployed, need access to resources, resume writing, case management. We also do citizenship and English language because one of the changes that I've seen since my time here is the demographic profile of our neighborhood. When I came here 15 years ago, we were primarily serving low-income white and Black individuals. Now, on our campus, we have 16 countries represented and 25 languages spoken. So we have literally had to morph our service delivery model to adapt to the needs of a highly mobile but important immigrant and refugee population that it's made its way to the Oakridge neighborhood. So the wonderful thing about Oakridge is we're not just a home. We are a place where people can grow and learn and prepare for the next stage of their lives. And we do that by stabilizing them in housing. I always look at housing as an anchor. And if you are able to stabilize in housing and have a roof over your head and feel like you don't have to worry about where you're going to sleep at night, it allows you to dream and think about so many other things that are important in your life's journey. So while housing is our anchor, our supportive services are the things that give people the wings that allow them to fly. And we're so excited about being able to support families through all of our programs, and really think that that's our secret sauce. That's the thing that distinguishes our housing from so many others in the community, that array of supportive services that literally wrap people in ways that help them grow and mold and shape is really what we're all about. So while we stabilize them in housing, we help them grow through our supportive services. And again, we think that that's sort of a game changer for the people that have the benefit of being able to live in our housing.
Teree, I'd like to switch gears once again. And I know that an important issue for you is the movement for racial equality, and recognizing that closing the racial gaps that we see in wealth, incarceration rates, and employment is something that we need to tackle. So as we sit here, summer of 2020, this is ever present in our minds. In fact, it's probably more talked about now than even coronavirus, which I never thought anything would overcome that in the headlines. So I know that you are heavily involved in this area and been working on some projects related to closing those gaps. Can you share with us how you are currently involved in generating both awareness and change?
Thanks for that question, Lance. Yes, I've been actively involved in this fight for a very long period of time. I actually probably think that my fight started at birth because of being an African American and an African American female. There were odds that I had to face from day one that oftentimes our white counterparts don't. But a lot of my time and attention over the course of the better part of the last 6 years has been focused on a couple of initiatives dealing with the racial wealth divide. I, in one of my other volunteer capacities, serve as the chair of the Directors Council. And the Directors Council is comprised of executive directors and CEOs of for-profit and nonprofit organizations that serve the needs of marginalized populations, but mostly serve the needs of individuals of African descent. That organization has been in Des Moines for over 20 years. And about 6 years ago, we decided that we really wanted to put a stake in the ground and really begin to tell the stories of people of color, individuals of African descent living here in Des Moines, but not only tell their stories, begin to share the data and the information that helps people to understand the huge disparities that exist for individuals of African descent in Des Moines. So with the financial support of the Northwest Area Foundation, which is located up in the Twin Cities, we started a journey that we call One Economy. And One Economy is predicated on the premise that we want to build opportunity for all. But in order to do that, we have to reduce the disparities that exist between the majority population and the minority population, and again, individuals of African descent in this particular case. So in 2016, we launched a first of its kind report that we called the State of Black Polk County, which began to reveal data and stories that helped us to understand the disparities that exist across 5 areas: housing, health, education, employment, and financial inclusion. And that report really sort of became sort of the clarion call to action, if you will, because up to that point, I think people knew that there were challenges. I don't know that people realized the deep divide that existed between the majority community and Black Polk County. And so that was sort of our first step in the journey, was to really begin to share the data and to educate people about the challenges. But we knew we couldn't stop there because really behind all data, and in order to change that data, you have to have action. And so just a few days ago, we rolled out our One Economy Blueprint for Action 2020, which is an opportunity for us to update the 2017 data, but more importantly, to identify goals and strategies and actionable steps that really begin to start the conversation about where people enter as they join us in doing this work. What I try to emphasize is that while this is an issue for individuals of African descent, the solutions lie in all of us pulling up a seat at the table and really trying to figure out how we roll up our sleeves and begin the business of creating this thing that we call one economy.
Yeah, that's powerful, and having that data and the analytics behind that is absolutely critical. And a lot of our listeners that will be listening to this podcast will be analytical. They'll be numbers people, but they'll also have what I consider big hearts, and a heart to serve and a heart to help. And if anybody's on social media, it's very easy to read a headline and have some sort of gush of emotion come out of you, whatever that emotion is. But from your perspective in your work, and you being on the ground level and you being involved in this study and everything that you do on a day-to-day basis, give our listeners, again, who have a big heart and have a desire to serve and help, give us a reality check. What is the status? Where do we stand from a racial inequality perspective? So give us that reality check, but then give us something that we can do beyond just post something on social media. What's that reality check? And then what is it that we can do to take action, like you're saying?
Sure. Well, let me just share with you a few of the statistics from our 2017 report and our 2020 report. So one of the things that was revealed in our 2017 report that I really think became the headline of One Economy is that right here in Des Moines, we have a tale of two cities. In 2017, we were the 11th best city to live in the United States. But at the same time, we were the third worst city in the United States for African Americans. We were the second best city to find a job, but at the same time, the unemployment rate for African Americans was 16.7%, nearly 2 times the average for other individuals in our community. So let's fast forward to 2020. So we were the third best place for affordable housing. However, for individuals of African descent, they were cost-burdened renters who were paying more than 30% of their income on housing. Over 55% of individuals of color were spending more than 30% on their housing. We were also the 7th best place to live the American dream, but at the same time, our Black unemployment rate was still nearly 2 times the rate for the rest of the community. Let me just very quickly talk about individuals who are interested in purchasing a home. And you guys know about wealth building and wealth creation. That's what you do every day. But for individuals of African descent, the best place for them to create wealth that they can pass on to the next generation is through home ownership, through property, through those sorts of things that are easily transferable. But for African Americans, they were denied loans at a rate of 2.2 times higher than the average Polk County citizen. So we have a really serious issue, not only in terms of equity, but also in terms of access. But I don't want to just preach doom and gloom, because understanding the data allows you to really understand how we need to change that paradigm, how we need to change the story, the actions that we need to take to move forward. So I think the best place for people to start is to educate themselves. Really understanding the issues of race and equity and social justice are critically important. And a great place to start is the One Economy reports. I would definitely suggest that people take time to really understand that, because that's on the ground, real time in the communities where we live, work, and play. So to me, that's a great place to start, educating yourselves. We also, on our tdcdsm.org website, have lots of other resources. We've recently launched a Black business directory. So people are able to support Black businesses, and there are a litany of Black businesses that exist here in Des Moines and Polk County that people can support. We also have a really easy statement of commitment and action that people can read and sign on to. It gives them some really easy steps that they can do themselves personally, or policy areas where they can get involved. And then there are a couple of other things that I'll just offer, just because I think that they're important things for people to think about when we think about this larger issue of race and social justice in our communities. I want to encourage people to start having conversations about race with their children. In order for us to really make a difference in future generations, we got to start with our own kids. And so having those hard conversations about race is critically important for our white community to do. And the reason why it's so important is because when you start having those hard conversations with your children, with time, it's going to change the kind of conversation I have to have with my kids. Yep. And I'm sure that you know about the talk that Black mothers and Black fathers have to have with their kids. But if you start with your kids, it's going to change what I have to talk about with my kids. The other thing that I would offer, and probably two things, start showing up at rallies and protests. But if that's not your thing, go to city council meetings, go to school board meetings, and make your voices heard. Those spaces are the microphone where we have the opportunity to broadcast the struggle. So I'm encouraging people to join the chorus of voices calling for change. If not now, when? And if not you, who? I think it's so important that everybody step up, even in their own way, big, small, wherever. It's just important for people to get engaged. And then the final thing that I'm going to suggest, and this is really something that happens at the local level, the county level, the national level, and even in your businesses and your corporations, start understanding that representation matters. What are you doing to ensure that there are voices at the table in your corporations, on your boards, and in elected spaces? Having people at those tables who can come with the cultural competency, background, and experience of the people they're representing allows you to have decision-making that is inclusive, equitable, and can be a game changer. So having those conversations, having those people at the table is important. And it's important because when voices are not heard, that means that someone is being silenced. So those would be the things that I would offer. And I'm hoping that some of that's helpful. But again, I would encourage anybody to go to the tdcdsm.org website. Lots of tools there that people can use to get involved.
Teree, when I read the report, the findings were unfortunately just both surprising and shocking to me. That it like you mentioned, it is a tale of two cities. And from my neighborhood, it's very easy for someone like me to stay in my silo and only see the one city. So it was quite eye-opening for me. And I think about, so first of all, we will post in the show notes a link to the blueprint and the report, so people can read that and read the full story. But I think back to the story you shared earlier about you learning that a school closing was going to impact your neighborhood, and how that one little seed, and many people can read stories like that and just say, shucks, that's too bad. But it really changed things for you, and you did more than shrug your shoulders. it moved you to 4 terms on the school board. I am hopeful that people can read this blueprint and be moved to use the resources and the tools they have to make this type of change that you're calling for. I do have one final question for you. You've already provided us with so many nuggets to chew on, but could you share with us kind of a final message, maybe something that you want us to ponder in our free moments, something to chew on and think about? What would that message be?
Yeah. Well, lots of things are going through my head right now because we've covered a lot of territory. But I think if there's probably a common thread that can be woven through all of the topics that we've discussed, education, the Oakridge Neighborhood, housing and opportunity, and then now the One Economy report and the challenge that we have around racial equity in our community. And I guess the one thing that I would leave people with is that we're only as strong as our weakest link. And as long as so many of us are broken, we won't be able to achieve our full potential as a community, as a region, as a state, and as a nation. And so really sort of beginning to be thoughtful about how you use your voice, your position, your power, and your influence is important to so many, but it's important to you too, because everybody wants to have a great quality of life. Everybody wants to have a community that's thriving. And when people are suffering, we'll never get there. So I think the thing that I want people to always remember is we are only as strong as our weakest link. So how do we create that chain, that strong chain that gives everybody access, that allows everybody to live the American dream, to dream their boldest dream, and to really begin to think about how we create one economy and a place where we all thrive and where we all have opportunity.
Yeah. And I think your personal story, just the change that you've helped foment is hopefully motivational for many people. I know I find motivation and hope in it. I know sometimes I struggle with how much impact I, as any one person, can have, but you are a case in point that you don't have to do it all. You just need to be a stepping stone, or as you said, a link in that chain. And so many times you could have just chosen to read the headline and let someone else deal with the problem. And you've made the decision in your life to be a part of that change and that struggle, even when it's not easy, and especially when it's not easy. So Teree, I think your last message is a great one to end on. Thank you for sharing with us. I hope that our listeners are all left with some nuggets of thought to consider, words to motivate them, and make some change in their personal lives. So on behalf of Adam and the rest of the team at Syverson Strege, we thank you, Teree, and we thank everyone for listening.
Thank you for listening to This Story Needs to Be Heard. If you know of a story that needs to be heard or would like us to help you in your pursuits, please contact Adam Steen at asteen@onlyworkforyou.com.